Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Global Impact, the podcast and vodcast that helps you connect the dots so that you don't have to. I'm your co-host, Michael Bociurkiw, and
I'm Melissa Ricci,
good to see
his
you
co-host.
again. Good to see you again, Melissa.
Good to
How's
see you
everything?
again. Everything is great. How is everything on your side?
Great, great. Down south to you guys. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
So we're gonna have a very special guest today. His name is Victor Malarek. So let me just give you a little bit of a biography. I think we're gonna share, Michael and I, his biography because it's very long. He's such an interesting person and character, and he's done so much. So Victor Malarek is known to most Canadians as a tough investigative reporter journalist who is willing to delve into stories revealing the worst side of humankind. His previous books investigate the clients of prostitutes and the women who break the hearts of Canadians whom they marry only to gain citizenship. Also, he tackled, on his book, the Natashas, the sex trafficking, the new global sex trade. He also wrote a book about illegal drug scene in Canada. I mean, those are very dark subjects. In his first book, actually, Hey Malarek, the Canadian of Ukrainian origin turns his investigative talent on his own past. It's a biography, basically. He has written the story of how he grew up as a street kid in Montreal, caught up in the world of boys' home, social workers, probation officers, and petty crimes. We'll be talking about it a lot with him. Victor began his career in journalism as a copy boy at Weekend magazine in Montreal in 1968. 2 years later, he joined the Montreal Star as a police reporter and was one of the first journalists to report on the 1970 October terrorist crisis of the Front de Libération du Québec. Michael?
So his journalism career has spanned more than 4 decades, most of it at the top institutions of the Canadian news pyramid, at Canada's national newspaper, the venerable Globe and Mail, and at the flagship news shows of its two top broadcasters, W5 at CTV and the CBC's Fifth Estate. He is the winner of one Gemini Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism, as well as 4 Michener Awards.
All right. So, well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm so happy that you're on the show. I'm very honored that you said yes to the show. I mean, Michael has been speaking highly of you. He looks at you, he looks up to you a lot, and he told me the stories, how you met, and how you contributed to his career, which is amazing. And
Yeah, a lot of
I've
books.
been doing my homework, and yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And thank you for all your work. Somebody has to do it. So let's start from the beginning. So I'm going to go straight to where it started. So what was it like to grow up in Quebec?
Well, I mean, I was born in Lachine, Quebec, when it was a farming community. My grandparents had come from Ukraine, and life seemed to be kind of interesting and strange at the same time, trying to fit in with the Quebec culture, the Ukrainian culture. I only spoke Ukrainian for the first 7 years of my life.
Oh,
And
were
then
you first generation or second generation? Did you
I am
actually, were
second
you born?
generation.
Second?
Second
Okay.
generation. Yeah.
Okay.
So, my parents got married after my father came back from the war. And had I understood now, or then I should say, what PTSD was all about, then I would have understood my father. The family completely disintegrated into a violent lifestyle. And we were taken away, and I lived in a boys' home in foster care, later on coming out and getting in little jackpots of problems and troubles and in detention centers and in and out. So basically a lot of street stuff, basically as well, sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everybody said you're going to fail. You're going to fail because you were in a boys' home, because you were a juvenile delinquent, because you're no good, you're useless. But managed to turn it around.
Good for you. It's like an underdog stories. I love underdog stories.
Yeah,
Good,
the sad
insight.
reality is though, living in a boys' home or in detention centers, you meet so many guys who are your age and you see them later on in life and they just went down the spiral, and you're trying to understand why they couldn't pick themselves up. And yet for some reason, I had this drive in front of me or inside of me saying, go for this, go for that. Don't let them get you down. And I guess a lot of the stuff that I saw when I was a kid made me the fighter that I am as a journalist. And what I did in writing my books and going out and doing investigations to really
Mm,
fight for the little guy. And that's what I've done most of my life.
right, right. Yeah, I mean, so you had actually a situation. You were 17, maybe, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong on time frame, because so much happened in your life. When a sympathetic judge gave you a second chance, and
Yeah.
so what
Yeah,
happened?
Judge Gamble. Yeah, he was my judge. I was in a major league jackpot with a bunch of guys who sort of sucked me into their vortex. Got in a lot of trouble. Even had police shooting at me. I was handcuffed, beaten up, taken to detention centers, and I figured that was the end for me. It was over. I knew the path that I would be on, which would be probably into prisons and whatever, similar
Mm,
to a lot of the guys who I was in a boys' home with. The judge
wow.
sort of looked at me and I don't know what it was. He saw something in me. And while the prosecutor and my probation officer were saying, give him 5 years, he looked at me and said, you know what? This is your moment, your chance. I'm going to let you go. And I didn't believe what I was hearing because I knew I was going away and he let me go. And that was the moment that I walked out the door and I took another path. Gave up a lot of the guys from the home, gave up a lot of guys from the street, and said, if I want to get out of this, I got to leave this behind. And I did. And he gave
Did
me
you
the
think?
first.
Did you think it was that somebody believed in you for the first time? Somebody gave you a chance and believed in you, and that's what was the turning point for you. That there was one person on your side for some reason, and that's how it all started. The journey of you becoming who you are today.
Yeah, like I wrote a book called Gut Instinct, where I feel in my gut something is right or something is wrong. Listen to your gut because that you were born with that. And I think this judge, because I went to see him when he was living in a senior's home and quite retired and quite old, and asked him, why did he let me go? And he said, there was something I felt inside about you. I
Wow.
knew that this was your moment. And here is a man who was, middle aged at that time, giving me a break, but he got it from his gut. He just looked at me and knew that was the moment. And I've always believed that you have to listen to your gut, to your instinct, and go with that. And it was a very good lesson for me.
Wow. Very inspiring. I think a lot of people need to be. A lot of
Yeah.
people are going through a hard time right now. Not many people have prospects with everything that's going on. So it goes to tell you that if you want to get out of a situation, you can. You have the
Yeah,
right frame of mind, and
but it takes a lot of work. I didn't just walk out of that courtroom and say, wow, I got this great break and I'm going to now make it. I had
yeah.
a lot of work in front of me to get rid of a lot of demons, to get rid of a lot of anger, to get rid of this, I want to get even. And, it took a long time. But
Mm,
you have to, one of the things that I know is a lot of the guys that I knew, they had their feet firmly planted in cement in the past, both feet. I don't have my feet in the past. I have one in the present and one going forward. The past made me, but the past won't break me. And that's what happens to a lot of people. They can't let it go. There's nothing I can do with what happened to me in foster care or the breakup of the family or being in detention or being in a boys' home. There's nothing I can do about that. It happened. Learn from it and then say goodbye and go forward.
right.
And
Wow.
it's interesting because a lot of what you're saying right now is so relevant after COVID and people in lockdowns and loneliness and depression. Um, the head of the WHO actually said a few weeks ago that the mental health crisis that is going to come out of COVID will actually be bigger than after World War II. I mean, that's a lot. That's
Yeah,
good.
it is, Michael. And I got to tell you, even myself, feel, look, I've got a nice house, I got a nice backyard to go into and all that kind of stuff. But I am just so frustrated and upset and angry that I can't go where I want to really go. I can't see my family. My mother's in Montreal. My brothers are in Montreal. I haven't seen them in over a year. My daughter works in Chicago in the film industry. I haven't seen her in over a year and a half. And it really starts to work on you. And I could understand seniors trapped in a senior's home, not being able to see their children or their grandchildren. It is huge, this depression and this oppression that's on you because of the pandemic.
Yeah. Now we talked, as Melissa mentioned, we talked quite a bit about, you read your bio at the top of the program, and how you got into journalism. I didn't see journalism school there anywhere. You didn't go to journalism school. Why?
No, I didn't. I answered an ad in a newspaper in Montreal that said office boy, and I got the job. And it was at Weekend Magazine. And I was watching over the year and a half that I worked there how the writers were doing things, how the editors were doing things. I read a lot of the stories and thought to myself, I couldn't give a heck of a hoot about this thing. They didn't grab me. But I said to myself, I think I could do that, but I would do it differently. And one day I got called into the office of the editor-in-chief, Frank Lowe, who said, I'm firing you. And I was going to get up from my seat and, deal with the situation. And he says, cuz tomorrow you start at the Montreal Star as a police reporter. And I did. And I was listening to police calls and all that kind of stuff. And the big story hit, the October crisis. And I was sitting there and I heard enlèvement. And I went, what the hell is an enlèvement? And it turned out to be abduction, kidnapping, James Richard Cross on, Redpath Crescent. And boom, I was part of that team. And after we finished that whole thing, the October crisis, I said to myself, wow, I really like the kind of investigation I did, but I knew certain things were happening. And I got a phone call one day and a tip-off of 3 kids who had hanged themselves in a detention center over Christmas. None of these kids had committed any crime. They were just dumped by the system that didn't have any time for them because the staff wanted their holidays. And when I broke that story, that was something big for me because my fight was this. My editors were saying, we don't do suicides because, we have to leave the privacy of the family. And I said, this suicide is a statement about what is happening with the system. And I fought for that story and telling them, you don't understand what's going on. These kids killed themselves because the system failed them. And that was the spark that led me into doing these investigations, where the Montreal Star editor said to me, you know what? You got it inside you. You got this burn inside you. Go after it. Then a few years later, the Globe and Mail got a job there. And the editor-in-chief and the managing editor, Clark Davey, who hired me, said, you are here with a group of other young guys and women, and you're to go out there and not cover things. You're going to break stories. You're going to go out there and investigate. And my whole life in journalism has been investigation after investigation after investigation, not ever once going to journalism school.
Well, and Victor, speaking of journalism, so there's currently a lot of anxious debate about the state of the media and the coverage, especially of the coronavirus pandemic. And you are quoted as saying, my friend, the overall coverage on COVID-19 was quote unquote pathetic, since most journalists are now essentially stenographers. You said, quote, newsrooms worldwide have been decimated by owners more interested in advertising revenue than giving journalists the practice time so they can report effectively on big issues. Instead, the flocks of journalist sheep trot from one press conference to another, jotting down the verbiage spewed by politicians and big pharma without challenge. Now, those are pretty strong words. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit on that.
Well, listen, I have watched multitudes of students graduate from journalism school. And there's one thing that journalism school does to them. It completely douses any possible burn they have inside of them. I think if you want to be a really good journalist, you have to have a burn. You have to have a commitment to the kinds of stories that you're going to cover. The pandemic is a classic commitment and burn that you should have. People are dying by the tens and hundreds of thousands. People are ending up in hospitals by the tens and hundreds of thousands. There is a crisis here, and all I hear on most networks is this pathetic reporting where no one is really digging into what the heck is really happening here, not only with where did this virus come from, but the vaccines and how the rollout of vaccines is happening, these attacks by various people to knock down one vaccine after the other. And there's a lot there. If I was back in the newspaper game or back on investigative television, I would be fighting like crazy to get these stories done. And for some reason, these reporters go to these press conferences, they listen to what a politician or what a doctor or whatever a scientist is saying without challenge. And there's one reason for this. They have no experience in that area. There used to be really good medical reporters, scientific reporters who over the years gathered an incredible amount of knowledge. We had a medical reporter at the Globe and Mail. Everyone said she could have been a doctor. In fact, she was better than most doctors. She diagnosed me a couple of times, I think for schizophrenia. No, I'm just kidding. She was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And everybody respected her. I covered a lot of beats for the Globe and Mail and did investigations on every single one of them, not going to the press conferences to tell me something about the environment or the law or the policing or whatever, but going out and breaking the stories. I never went into the House of Commons in Parliament or in any legislature to listen to the buffoons that we elect blather on and act for the cameras and act for the media. You go out and you dig for what is really happening in government, in the government departments, the misspending, the gouging, the corruption, the lying and the deceit. Year after year after year, I broke one story after another, and not once having to step into a press conference. Or if I did go to a press conference, I would watch certain people quiver and get nervous because they knew I wasn't there to listen to the spewing of the press release, but I had something. But you don't see that today. And one of the reasons is there's been so many cutbacks, and the owners of newspapers, the owners of television stations are interested in the almighty buck. They've been cutting back and cutting back and cutting back. And you know what they've been cutting back? A lot of the experienced journalists, people who have been in the trenches for years, know the questions to ask, know when they hear BS, and have a feeling in their gut something is wrong. So they bring in all of these journalist students from journalism schools who've had the fire doused inside them, and they go out and they basically go, who, what, where, when, why, and how. No, you know what it is? What else? There's something else going on here. And they don't ask these questions. Frustrates the hell out of me. But
Victor, what do you think about the canceling culture that we're experiencing right now, where everybody is afraid to actually have an opinion and everybody's siding up with one side or the other, particularly here in the US? What's happening? Because if you watch Fox, it's one side. If you watch CNN, it's another side. Where is non-biased journalism? Why don't we have that anymore? I mean, back in the days, journalists were giving the news and they were using facts and they were doing investigating, researching. Today, it's a narrative. It's how they feel.
One of the major failings of journalists in the United States, for example, was that they did side and they ignored a huge, frustrated, freaked out, spaced out bunch of Americans And guess what happened? They brought Mr. Pumpkin in to be the president. And everybody was shocked, thinking, why would you bring this clown in to be a president? Because you weren't covering the other side. You weren't listening to all the arguments. You know, whenever I used to go out and cover an election, I would listen to all arguments. I didn't care if it was left, right, center. I want to know what this side is thinking. It may be the enemy, I don't know. But you always have to know who the enemy is, who you think the good guy is, or whatever. But if you think that, well, I'm a journalist and I'm a liberal, and you don't cover the conservatives, then you're doing a humongous disservice to your readers, your viewers, and your listeners. You listen and you go for all sides. Give it a balance. Look, I have a position. I have a political position. I always have in my life. But I've always given every side the opportunity to give their argument or their description of whatever they want. So that when the viewers see me or hear what I'm doing, they say, hey, yeah, okay, I can pick this, or, you know, I really like this, I really like that. But this is, again, now these journalists who suddenly go out there and go, well, I'm a Democrat, or I'm a liberal, left-leaning, or whatever. No, leave your politics in the drawer. Go out there and listen to what people are saying, because this is how a pumpkin without a brain got elected to be president in the United States. I could say that now because I have an opinion, because I'm not doing this anymore. But the reality is this: do your job. Don't pick a side. Do your job.
Thank you for that. And can you come out of retirement, please? Can you come back?
Yeah, or why don't you tell us what you really think?
Well, I mean, we need more people like you right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, when you see these talkers, one of the problems too in journalism today is they have these news cycles, like, 24-hour CNN, 24-hour MSNBC, 24-hour CBC and CTV and BBC, and they have to fill it. And a lot of times they fill it with junk, or they just keep repeating the stuff. And these reporters are, it kills me when they go to a reporter and they're asking them to comment on a situation when there are experts out there who know what's going on. That's who you go to. But, you see, I mean, this is how cheap things are. You look at a program and they suddenly bring in a reporter who's sitting in Ottawa or Washington or New York or LA or in Vancouver or in London, England, commenting about something happening in the Middle East or in Africa or in Australia. And I'm going, oh, wait a second, they're not even there. The only way that they're getting something so that they can talk as experts, these so-called journalists, is because they're talking heads. Other people's work. And they absorb it and they go, well, let me tell you what's really happening in Mali and Zimbabwe and in Croatia and in the Middle East and Syria. And they haven't been there ever. Kills me.
Do you think part of the problem, Victor, and I know Melissa has some questions coming up on your book, but do you think part of the problem here too is politicians have manipulated the situation? For example, watching the Prime Minister Trudeau's press conferences throughout the pandemic, it's very staged, short time. Journalists are selected. There may be allowed one question, maybe a follow-up. Is that part of the problem here as well?
It's always been a problem. It's been a problem in covering politics. When you cover the president, when you cover a prime minister, they have their favorites. They point to them and they go, you ask a question, you ask a question. And basically, the politician knows what the question is going to be. Every time I walked into a legislature or into parliament, the cabinet ministers looked at me and went, you're not after me, are you? I said, no, maybe not this time, but soon you'll have your day. The reality is this: you can't just, too many reporters on the Hill or in Parliament or over in the White House, whoever, want to be part of the gang, part of the friendship. They want the politicians to slap them on their back. I don't want any politician to slap me on the back or anywhere. I'm not their friend. I'm there to get the story, to get the information that my readers or viewers or listeners want so that they can make a decision. I'm not their friend. I don't want to be their friend. And yet the way when you're out there with this herd of sheep that call themselves journalists, and you see them being friendly and everybody's happy together and they want to be part of the clique, the ruling clique. It just turns my stomach. But this has been going on for decades, And that's not what journalism is about. Journalism is keeping an arm's length. It's not hugging, it's an arm's length, guys, not hugging. Stop the hugging. Then we'll get good information.
Thanks,
Yep.
Melissa.
Well, let's talk about your first book, Hey Malarek. I actually watched the movie yesterday and was sad. I mean, I knew what I was going to watch because, you know, Michael told me about his story, but the movie was very good, was poignant. And okay, so first question is, what made you want to write your first book? I mean, you're a journalist, you know, and then you're suddenly a writer. What was the motive? Well, I'm guessing it was because you had a lot to say coming from this background, but any other?
Yeah, while I was at the Montreal
reason?
Star, I wrote about the suicides that had taken place in the detention center. I also did a series called Paths to Freedom, where I looked at the whole situation that young people were facing when their homes broke down and they were taken into the so-called care of the state. Then when I joined the Globe and Mail, I started covering those issues as well. And suicides were still going on. Kids were killing themselves. Kids were being beaten. Kids were being sexually abused. All kinds of things that I had seen as a kid in the system and still going on 20 years later, 30 years later. So I thought about writing a book from the journalist's point of view, saying, this is still going on, blah, blah, blah. And I kept thinking about it and I said, you know, I know what's going on from my own personal point of view, and it continues to happen. What happened to me and my brothers and to all the guys who were in the homes and all of the girls who were in the various institutions and homes as well was similar. We came from broken families. We came from an alcoholic father. We came from whatever situation. So I decided to write the book. It is about me, but it's about all of the kids. So many people wrote me and said, you know, I was exactly like that. I felt exactly like that. That's exactly what happened to me. One of the funny things was several people wrote me and said, gee, you know, I was a bedwetter. Well, because I admitted I was a bedwetter. You know, I remember one time somebody asked me at a conference, did you stop wetting the bed? I said, yeah. I said, last week, you know, because I was getting really tired of trying to swim out of my bed every morning. But, you know, I stopped after I got out of the boys' home. But so many people I knew were experiencing and continue to experience what it's like to come from a broken family, what it's like to be taken into the so-called care of the state, what it's like to feel abandoned. You know, all of the problems that take place by these people who are the child savers. I went to an international conference after Hey Malarek was published, and this woman got up and said, you know, I remember what the boys' home where you were, what it was like. We heard all of the stories about the beatings and this and, you know, and the abuses that went on with the staff against the kids. Yeah. And your agency, which filled the place, lady, was up the street. You knew that institution where the abuses were going on and you did nothing. And she said, what are we supposed to do? Close it down? And what do we do with 180 boys? My answer was very simple. You may have a master's degree or a PhD in stupidity, but let me tell you something. This is what you could have done. You could have gotten rid of the sadists. You could have gotten rid of the people who beat on those boys and made them turn and become violent, and bring in people who cared, because you say you are in the system that is supposed to care, you know, but they didn't. And she just stood there and just stared at me because she knew I was right. It wasn't a difficult solution, but yet this continued on for years and years. And when I wrote from a personal point of view, I can say, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to hundreds and even thousands of children across Canada, across the United States, across the free world, and continues to happen.
But I think that what happened in the month of March was that suddenly many of the residents got the COVID-19. Many of the employees decided to leave. The information given to the CIUS was about only a shortage of employees, but we discovered Friday night that there were 31 deaths in about 3 weeks. Didn't know that. And I think the owners of this place must have informed the CIUS about this situation. That's the first problem I see. Because it's very nice to say I need more workers, but to say, hey, I'm at 31 deaths in a couple of weeks, that's something very urgent. So I think that in the future, we knew that in some CHSLD there was a shortage of manpower because we cannot attract, we don't pay them enough. But it must not be the case at Aaron. Aaron is charging something like between $3,000 and $10,000 a month to residents. So they must be able to pay well their people with this kind of money. So there's no excuse for me.
I'd find it hard to believe if during the pandemic and what we all saw tragically happening in the senior care home, you must have had some sense of deja vu because there was serious cases of neglect, of incompetence in Ontario and Quebec, leading to deaths of seniors. I mean, how did you take that?
Oh, I have to tell you, when I heard what happened in Dorval in Quebec, I just punched a wall for people to abandon these seniors so that they died of COVID or they died of malnutrition or they died of dehydration and nobody cared. And the same thing happened in Ontario and the same thing happened in the United States where people actually deserted, including the governments, people who could not defend themselves. It would be like, in the boys' homes and in the child care system where the children were the ones who were getting abused and beaten and having horrible experiences in their lives. And at the very end of your life, to see these people, these men and women who had lived their lives and just wanted, peace and quiet and a safe existence in the so-called golden years of their lives. I'm telling you, there should be criminal charges pressed against people who abandoned them. And let me tell you, over the decades, I have done several investigations of seniors' homes and showing the absolute pathetic way that they were being treated. W5 has done a series after series after series at CTV for years on this very issue. And it just goes round and round. We found stacks and stacks and stacks of complaints on seniors' homes in Quebec, in Ontario, right across Canada, and in the United States that showed all kinds of issues and problems and never addressed. The other day, it was really hot in Toronto, and I find out that the seniors in one home are sweating to death because they don't even have an air conditioner in there. Now, come on. You couldn't even give them an air conditioner, you creep. These cretins are making a huge amount of money on the fact that these people are in these homes and they can't spend money to put an air conditioner so that these people don't swelter to death. They didn't have enough with COVID. They didn't have enough with people abandoning them. And now they have to sweat to death because it's 32 degrees outside.
So how did this happen? Is it because we've allowed the profit motive to come in, have private companies take care of these? Is it the government for not paying attention to the lessons learned, as you pointed out? Or is it part of society's fault too, that we've fallen so easily into this kind of mentality of mass warehousing of our elderly?
We shouldn't be mass warehousing. We mass warehoused in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, particularly in Quebec with the Duplessis regime, which had more people institutionalized because they had mental problems or physical problems or broken homes, or God forbid that they were born out of wedlock. And even worse, God forbid if they were born because the father had raped his daughter and she had a baby. The situations of institutionalization should have been gone and done. But when these seniors' homes are there to protect seniors in their elderly years, why does the government turn it over as a profit-making situation? And if you're going to do that, then when you investigate, why don't you shut them down or do something proper? You know, they don't. It's like when I was in a boys' home. You don't want to shut it down because what are we going to do with these seniors? The government has known for decades. Every government knows what goes on in these places. And that when they go in to investigate, they phone. We're coming to look at the situation here tomorrow or next week on Tuesday at 3:00. Gives everybody an opportunity to clean up their clients, their patients, the seniors, to clean up their rooms, to do everything to make it look really nice. Because if you went there on a surprise visit, you would be shocked and appalled. And this should not be happening to seniors. You know, my mother, who's 93 years old, was crying one time as she saw a documentary I had done and what had happened to some of these seniors, shocking stuff. And she said to me, please don't ever put me in a place like that. I don't ever want to go into a place like that. And I said, Mom, you don't have anything to worry about. I'm the calm one of the three brothers. And I will go in there and I will talk to people my way, and they're going to deal with you as a queen. However, if they don't, you have the other two, and they're not calm. So she smiled and laughed.
Got the message.
The reality is, so many people, I interviewed men and women whose mothers and fathers had been seriously abused, who died a horrible death in some of these seniors' homes. They cry, but they don't have, I don't know what it is, the fortitude, the guts, the whatever, to go in and deal with it. This is your mother, this is your father. You can't let them in the last years of their lives die suffering at the hands of people who don't give a damn about them, but give more of a damn of making more money so they can build a bigger house for themselves.
Yeah, just a quick comment, and Melissa's got a lot more questions, but there's one thing that really struck me about COVID, and it's not only seniors dying in facilities which are supposed to look after them, but a lot of people, if you look at some of the obituaries, it sends a chill down my spine. I mean, we have people who have survived the Holocaust, the brutality of the Khmer Rouge, Venezuela. They've risked their lives to flee oppressive regimes. They come here to North America, a peaceful country, and it's COVID that gets them at the end. It's so sad.
Yeah, I mean, this whole pandemic has been, well, you mentioned it earlier. It's just such an oppressive and depressing thing.
Yeah.
We're now hopefully seeing a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to my second shot of a vaccine in a couple of weeks. But I have to tell you, it's been a horrible situation, a horrible year and a half, 2 years. And I'm just praying that it stop.
Because they tell good stories, because they go after good issues, because they're solid reporters behind them. It's got a reputation out there, and it's always had a reputation out there for being one of the vehicles out there that gets the bad guy, that gets the story for you so that you understand it. It's not a minute 50 of news. When I was first asked to come to CBC, I thought they wanted me to do news. And I went, I'm not doing news. A minute 50 is a waste of my time. But they said, no, Fifth Estate. And the Fifth Estate, like W5, it does, 20 minutes or a full 44 minutes. And you get to understand what's really happening, and you get to see the characters. I remember when I first came, I used to write these big features and investigations for the Globe and Mail in print. But I realized how powerful, and I never did at that point, sitting in front of somebody who's tearing their soul out, or sitting in front of somebody who's a real bad guy and getting them, and how powerful that is on a camera, and that people get to see the emotions and get to see the anger and the sadness and the pain and the suffering.
You've been a host on CBC on the show, is that the Fifth Estate? It was called
Yes.
the Fifth Estate in Canada, right? And from 1990 to 2000, which is 10 years, it's a long time. And later on W5. And there was one episode that you did called The One That Got Away. And so what happened during that episode? How did you get involved in the Jason Dix criminal investigation?
Jason Dix?
Jason Dix, yeah.
Oh, the guy who they accused of a double murder.
Right, yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's a long, I mean, we're going into history here.
Sometimes when people say to me, "Oh, you remember when you interviewed me?" and I go,
I know, you're like, what? I mean, so much happened. I know, yeah. Do you remember anything about it? Or...
Oh, yeah. I mean, look,
yeah.
I've been involved in a lot of investigations where police have said, this is the person who was guilty. This is the person who did the crime. And I ended up looking at a situation, they would call me and go, oh, I'm innocent. Everybody in prison, by the way, is innocent. But then when you start looking around, this thing was a complete cock up by the RCMP in Edmonton. They went after the wrong guy and they set him up. I mean, they kept him in prison. And when it came time for them to take him to court, everybody was sort of scurrying around because they kept him in prison because he had sent a letter to someone saying, hey, deal with this witness, deal with this woman for me. So they kept him in prison for a year while he was waiting for trial. That letter was written by the RCMP, by the police. Holy, and he was turfed out. And I looked at all of how the police put together the evidence. It was impossible for him to do that double murder. Impossible. And he didn't know these people. There was no connection to anything. I certainly had an idea or two of who could have possibly done it. But, the police, when they put the horse blinders on, that's what they go for. I've done a lot of stories on wrongfully convicted. And it's normally the police who go in and believe that this is the guy and we're going to get him. And lo and behold, when I look at it and check in all the evidence, again, look, not taking sides, you look at all of the evidence. The police were like this, and to this day they do the same thing.
So do you think like it was the work of like few rogue officers, or it's just a systemic problem with the law enforcement, and that needs to be addressed? Because with the whole Floyd issue last year and everything, I mean, things came out obviously, but so what was in that situation you were investigating? Was it like few officers, was just the whole law enforcement?
Oh, it became, you believe, the two police officers who were investigating a homicide. And I've seen this many, many times across North America and elsewhere, where the investigating officers believe that this is the guy who did this, and nothing's going to change their mind. After I did Dix, the cops came to my door at my hotel door and hammered on it. And they, oh, you believe this guy? Listen, he's the guy who did it. And I said, what are you doing here, you idiots? You come to my hotel room to what, intimidate me? First of all, they would say, well, Guy Paul Morin, he murdered that girl. Or this other guy in Winnipeg, he murdered that woman. And this guy over in New Brunswick, he murdered that woman. And you guys got him off. I said, no, the evidence unequivocally proved that these people did not commit. In fact, the evidence was so unequivocal that they all were released. But the police still believed that the media somehow twisted the facts. You can't twist DNA. You can't twist really important facts that they, hid or they ignored. The one thing about being a police officer is you have to go into an investigation with an open mind. Because someone says, I know he did it, doesn't mean he did it. I've worked
like journalism, same thing as journalism. Police officers, journalism, it's about figuring it out, not just, sitting in your position, which that's what they're doing right now.
I've worked on at least 8 stories where the people that were convicted and in prison for murder never did it, proved it, 100%.
Wow, that's like,
And I've also been involved in stories where police have set up situations
ooh,
and taken someone overseas who was supposed to be a big heroin, the big kingpin, Mr. Big, in importing heroin into Canada. And it turned out that no, he was a heroin addict who couldn't have ever thought about the kind of thing that they wanted him to do.
well, actually talking about that, Olivier, Alain
Yeah.
Olivier reached out to me on Twitter, and he wanted to ask you a question. I know we're not on that yet, but since you're bringing it, I mean, let's talk about this story. That was like, there was a movie that's been made. The movie was called Target Number One in 2020, came out last year. And the US title was Most Wanted. And you investigated in the 80s the arrest of this Canadian drug addict named Alain Olivier in Thailand. And Josh Harnett actually played you in the movie, which it's exciting. We're going to have to talk about that because I want to know if you met him and everything, but that's aside. So let's go back. So Alain Olivier reached out, and he got excited when he saw we were going to interview you. And he said, his question was, what do you think of the movie Target Number One, which was inspired by the story of my treatment at the end of RCMP?
The movie, for me, I mean, it's, I guess, a good ego boost for me in terms of what I did to get Alain Olivier and his story out there and get him out of prison when he was originally going to be sentenced to death, and his sentence was commuted to 99 years, and he was out in 7-8 years. When I got involved in that story, a Mountie had been killed overseas. I had done a book, Merchants of Misery, which deals with the world of drugs. Yeah. And I decided, well, I'll go over there and do a story, and I'll interview this creep, this big kingpin, this heroin guy, importer. And I, at every step of the way, I was being, rerouted or stopped, or I couldn't get to point A to point B. I couldn't get into the prison. And every time I asked a question, I never got a really good answer from the RCMP. And I knew at that point, something's wrong here. Something really stinks. And when I went to interview Olivier, eventually in prison, because I used my contacts from that book, he told me a story that I thought, guy, it's crazy. Why would the Mounties do this? And yet everything he said checked out. They set him up. This guy could never have done this crime. They set him up. They paid for him to go overseas. They gave him the money, and he thought he was working with Hell's Angels who were going to shoot him if he didn't do what they told him to do. The thing is that Alain Olivier was entrapped by the RCMP, entrapped in a situation that should never have happened. The RCMP broke so many rules and regulations. Number one, they are not to go overseas on any bust or anything unless they are invited by the foreign government. That's a fact. Two, when they get there, they are not to be involved in an active takedown. They're going to be involved as being helping out by giving information. That's it. Number three, they're not to be armed. They're not to be armed. All of this was broken out in Bangkok. And the worst thing was they told everybody that this kingpin had been arrested and jailed, I don't know, it was 13, 14, or 16 different situations. And the Solicitor General signed a document. Herb Gray was the Solicitor General at the time, saying that this guy was a convicted felon. He's never been convicted. He was a 2-bit heroin addict. And they were sending over material there saying that this guy was a kingpin. This was an operation by a bunch of ego-driven quacks who said to themselves, we want to belly up to the bar and say, we did a bust in the infamous Golden Triangle. That's what they wanted to do. And my last documentary for W5 was on 2 people in Vancouver, who, a husband and wife who had converted to Islam, who were heroin addicts, who, when you put the two of them together, couldn't tie their shoelaces, were running around saying, Allah Akbar, and the Palestinians this, and life is terrible. Well, people heard them, so they called the RCMP. The RCMP called Canadian Security Intelligence Service. Canadian Security Intelligence Service interviewed them, said, these two guys, the husband and wife, they're flakes. They're nobodies. They can't do anything. But guess what? The RCMP decided, wow, we're going to get ourselves two terrorists. So they can belly up to the bar and say that. They entrapped these two individuals who, again, couldn't tie their shoelaces together and got them convicted. But unfortunately for them, they videotaped every single meeting with them. And you can see how they were entrapped. They never could think of anything. When I was talking to the guy, I said to him, you're putting kettle bombs in there. He goes, yeah, well, man, that was their idea. And you see him in a van where he's sitting there listening to Arab music. It has no idea what being Arab or Muslim is all about. And they're going to a Canadian Tire to get nails to put in the kettle bombs. And he goes out, comes back 20 minutes later, and the undercover officer, who's a mujahideen, says, where's the nails? Oh, what nails? And this happened on a couple of occasions. These people, he wanted to fire rockets from Vancouver into Seattle. So I said to him in the interview, well, they would explode. He goes, no. I said, yeah, but you said you're going to fire rockets. He goes, yeah, but I had Free Palestine on it. And if they exploded, no one would know the message that I would send. And I'm going, do. The Supreme Court Justice in that case in BC said they were entrapped by the RCMP, and the RCMP, those officers who were involved, should face criminal charges. They gave these people small amounts of C4, plastic explosives, to put in a kettle bomb. These people didn't even know what a kettle bomb was and how to make it. But because the explosive was there, it means life in prison. And wow, they were real terrorists. And yet they were videotaping them, putting the kettle bomb down. They didn't even need that, but they just wanted to make a big show of it. And in the end, I got emails from a corporal going to the sergeant saying, these guys, these two, there's no way they could ever think of this. We're going to get nailed one day in a court of whatever, because we're entrapping them. And they did.
Now, Victor, I have a strong feeling that you don't get Christmas cards from the RCMP or from any other law enforcement agency for that matter. Now, it strikes me as odd that overseas, they're viewed as Canada's national icon. In fact, in the United States, there's a drama, I believe, filmed in Chicago, where a nice RCMP officer has a friendly dog and they bust all sorts of wrongdoings. But over the past few years, year after year after year, we see serious, I would almost call them acts of neglect by the RCMP, starting with what happened in Nova Scotia, that awful shooting where the cops didn't raise the alarm and allow this guy to roam for free. Then we have, even many more years ago, female members of the force, for example, in Vancouver, who have come forward and spoke of terrible treatment in the hands of their male colleagues. And then just in the past few days, I mean, Vancouver, where I live close to Vancouver, has turned into a playground for gangs. Shootings in front of Vancouver Airport, the guys get away, and the RCMP can't seem to get their arms around that one. What's going on? Is it a systemic problem or what?
Oh yeah, there are huge problems. In BC, I did 4 stories on shootings by the RCMP that really, you have to wonder if those Mounties were not gun crazy. There was no reason to shoot at all. And then they lied about it. And I mean, lied about it. The Jaganski case, where they tasered this Polish man, they lied about it. And fortunately, somebody had a video going off of their phone. And when that went to court, I remember in Toronto where a guy was watching a fight in a parking lot of a mall. And these police officers came in, and one of them puts his glove on and smashes the kid, broke his teeth. And this kid was a Somali immigrant. And he was scared that he was going to be deported. And guess what? They charged him with assault on the sergeant who smashed him in the face. Got all the way to court. The kid is shaking. And then one day, the guy walks up to the lawyer for the kid and goes, got a cell phone here. Shows it. And there's the kid standing there watching the fight, and smash. And the judge went crazy. Held them all in contempt of court. They defended the police officer, the blue wall, or in the RCMP case, the burgundy red wall. And that's what happens. You have to be able to, as a cop, to say, this, what you did here was wrong. I went to interview a Mountie who had witnessed the shooting of an individual by another cop. And that Mountie was in psychiatric care or psychological, getting, because of what that person witnessed. And when I went to try to find her, I found her husband, and her husband said, well, she's in counseling right now in this town. I said, oh, well, over the shooting? He goes, no, over the fact that she was told to lie, and she's a really good Christian. Wow. They lie for each other. There has to be, in the United States, in Canada, everywhere around the world, they have to start looking at police forces and the kinds of people that they bring into the force and the kind of mentality that they bring into the force. You have to start looking at people who have a good sense of themselves, a good sense of what being right and wrong is all about. You can't lie for somebody who just beat up a kid for no reason or sat on someone's neck because I don't know what the heck was going on in that cop's mind. There is a real need worldwide to look at police forces. They're there to serve and protect. And it's serve and protect the population, not serve and protect the policemen who are really bad. And there are really bad people in all occupations. But when you got a guy who carries a gun and that kind of power, that's what always bothers me when I see things in Russia and I see things in Belarus right now, where these cops, or in Myanmar, where these people who have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters who are just ordinary people, and they're beating up with truncheons and with rubber bullets and whatever. Don't any of them have a brain to say, what's going on here is wrong? It's absolutely wrong. Where are their commanders? Where are people to say, Mr. Prime Minister or Mr. President, I'm not going to kill my own people. I am not going to beat up my own people. I am not going to, just rape them or do whatever it is. And this actually shows to me the kind of people who join these police forces. They will, I am following orders. No, you don't follow an order to beat up a woman or beat up a kid. You're there to think for yourself. And one of the things that it's like being in the military. They make a soldier into, I will listen to whatever you tell me to do. And we're part of this gang. We're part of the troop. We're part of the brigade. We're part of the, whatever. But we've got to now continue looking at the police forces. I mean, look, there've been royal commissions into the RCMP many years ago over the FLQ crisis and all of the garbage that they did behind the scenes. And they said they're going to clean it up. That's how the Canadian Security Intelligence Service got, created. The reality is this: we have to start looking at our police forces and what we bring into the police force. And if you're going to have bullies who are bullies in the schoolyard and you want to make them cops, you got a problem right there. And I've hung out with cops. I've gone on drug busts with them. I've gone out on all kinds of situations with them. Way back during the FLQ crisis and whatever. I know a lot of them. I know a lot of them are really phenomenal people. But man, I gotta tell you, there's a mindset that's scary. And that mindset's gotta stop. When they had the G7, or whatever it was in Toronto, and how they blocked off a street and terrorized Torontonians who were there with their kids and whatever. And I'm looking at this going, wait a second. You watched the gangs light up and burn down police cars and everything, and you stood way back, and you will let the public see the worst of the worst that you could have dealt with like that, explode even more, and then you go in with the riot cops.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's not the way to do it. You know where a situation is and you can put it out. But what I see worldwide with these police officers who got their badges beating up people and gassing them and everything when it's a peaceful protest, wrong.
Yeah, seems to be happening more and more. Melissa, I see you have the Natashas there, the book, and
Yes, this work is dear to my heart because I'm a woman. So I can, and in Hollywood. So, well, you know, so the Natashas, actually, the Natashas. It's a book that you wrote in 2003. Well, sex trafficking has been a lot in the news in the past few years, you know, with the whole Weinstein, Epstein, what was his name? Keith Raniere, sex cult. It feels like right now there's a sort of avalanche, you know, of everything is coming out.
Yeah.
And all the victims are talking, which is great because we needed that. But you started the work. I mean, this is like, that was written in 2003, 2 decades ago. Now, here's, first of all, what made you start that investigation into sex trafficking and, you know, on women and girls and children? I mean, how did you get into this investigation?
I'm always looking around and you know, I saw a couple of small stories about people arrested for sex trafficking in different parts of Europe on the wires. Okay. And I went, what is that all about? And then an alarm bell went on in my head. And I said, I'm going to go look at this. I asked the Globe and Mail if I can go and work on it. And they were saying, well, you know, we carried a story. Well, that was an idiot who was a useless managing editor at the time. So I went out and started to go to different countries looking at it, but getting into the streets and going into the brothels, going into these bars and whatever. And
so which countries were you going to? Did you go in East European countries or everywhere in the world? Did you do like an international investigation or just specific places?
Well, I was concentrating on the latest wave, but I had been to Thailand and saw what was going on in Thailand, and I went to the Middle East. I went to several European countries, and I went where the UN was, bringing peace and stability. And you know, when they had their R&R, rest and recreation, guess what they were doing? The peacekeepers with their nice little blue helmets and whatever were in fact in bars and in brothels throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, and in just trying to think of the other country name, but they were there raping the girls. And
wow.
You know, when I brought that up to the UN, they started to try to deny it. And the reality was that so many of these men from peacekeeping units that were British, American, French, Canadian, German, Italian, Turkish, Russian, Ukrainian, were out there having their way with 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old, 20-year-old girls who were trafficked from Romania, from Ukraine, from Russia, from Bulgaria, from Latvia, Estonia, all of these things. And I thought, what's going on here? The UN is involved in this. And the more I went to different countries and saw what was going on the street and who was behind it and what was, you know, what these young women were suffering, there's a book. But the book is from the street. It's from the girls that I helped. I rescued a couple of young women and I had guns put to my head. I had to, you know, escape from different places. It got really serious, but I just felt that something had to be done. And the book that I wrote, I remember when it came out, one of my publishers called me and said, I have a problem with your book. And I went, what's that? She goes, you know, you're not ibbiting and sitting any papers. I said, well, I read all kinds of papers on trafficking written by people with PhDs. It was cold and indifferent, and who cares? I said, but I went out like a reporter, like an investigative reporter, and felt what was really going on. I had the burn to do that story. And I wanted to tell their story and tell the situations that these young women were entrapped in. And that's what I did with the Natashas. But then I told the publisher, then you wait to see who gets ibbited and sitted all over the place. And that book was really the first book that came out that really, it's now called basically
Raveled everything.
Yeah.
So what was, I wanted to ask you, did you get any backlash, threat when you wrote that book? Because from, investigating all this, I mean, I'm sure some people in power felt threatened by your book, anybody who's in.
I got backlash from the UN because they were embarrassed that their soldiers were directly involved in raping and having their way with these young trafficked women. I attacked the American government, the US State Department, which was doing every year a look at trafficking around the world and giving passing grades to countries like Russia. Seriously, folks, they're one of the worst. China, seriously, folks, one of the worst. India, seriously, folks, one of the worst. There were countries that got a green light pass, a level 1 pass, which to me were criminal what was going on in their countries. And yet the countries that they attacked and said were the worst, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, do you get a pattern here? They were the enemies of the US. And I gave a speech at the State Department that one of their top people got up and was just screaming at me. And I went, you know what? I don't give a damn what you have to say. Why don't you quit your job and give it to somebody who's going to really give a damn? Don't write your reports and walk in around like I'm the sheriff and I've got my 6 guns out and I'm going to do something about it. You did nothing about it. And right now, more and more women are still being trafficked. More and more children are still being trafficked around the world. There are certain situations in different countries where it has improved dramatically. They've done something about it. And they don't buy into the bullcrap that are handed to them by the so-called sex workers unions that are saying, we want, free and open and legalized prostitution because it leads to a safer environment. That is an absolute lie, because I've been in countries where it's legal, like the biggest whorehouse in the world called Germany. Over 450,000 women in that country are in the sex trade. 85% of them are not German. They're not from Germany. Where'd they come from? They were trafficked in from other countries. They didn't want this in their lives. They don't want this in their lives. The vast majority of women never have dreamt of this in their lives, and they're entrapped in it. And it is the responsibility of government and the responsibility of the police and the responsibility of the courts to make certain that they're rescued and that their lives are protected from these leeches that go after them. Now, everybody says to me all the time, you have to go after the traffickers. The main problem here is maybe the traffickers, and you can keep bringing as many women and girls and children as you want into the system. The problem here is the men, the Johns, the guys who buy sex, the guys who go out there because they think they've got a little bit of money that they can go out and buy whatever they want. Because, hey, she took the money, I don't have to feel guilty. The bottom line is you have no responsibility for this. You have every responsibility for this, because these girls are entrapped. You think they're going to tell you I'm trapped when there's a gun at their head or a knife at their throat or whatever? This is a very dangerous situation. It is one of the worst human rights crises in the world against women and children. The worst. And very little has still been done about it. Very little. Occasionally you get a police raid here, a police raid there.
Well, do you think it might be because the people who are at the top of the food, the people who are basically controlling all the sex traffickers are very powerful people and they're untouchable? Because if it was like going up, like when you look at Epstein network, this whole scandal, and slowly we went back up. I mean, there's so much conspiracy around it, and I'm not talking here about conspiracy, but there are facts also. There are things we know, and people are being protected. So maybe the government doesn't want to do something because of that too. You know?
Well, Hollywood has done enough stupid movies on prostitution. You know, they have these decorated pimps that look like cocks on a block. They had that stupid movie with what was it called? Julia
Roberts, Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, that was a John story on.
Yeah, but anyway, you know,
Pretty Woman.
Yeah, Pretty Woman and all that. I mean, but she looked like a moron. She didn't even know what being a prostitute was all about in that movie. So silly. But you know, they kind of idolize it. The reality is this all comes down to men. It comes down to your moral values. It has nothing to do with being Christian. It has nothing to do being an evangelical or any of that stuff. It comes down to your moral values. You don't go out and buy a woman's body, period. And you have to understand that the vast majority of them are not there because you happen to be a sexy 350-pound pimple-faced slob. And she just can hardly wait to be with you because you're giving her $100 or $200 or $500. The reality is they don't want to be there. They have pimps controlling them. The reality is that we are in a male-dominated society, a patriarchal society that looks at women as disposables. And we have to stop that kind of view. You will never have total equality in this world, total equality between men and women, as long as men think that they can buy a woman's body or believe that because they have money in their pocket, they can buy a woman's body. There are women who will say to me and have said to me, I like what I do, mind your freaking business. And I say, do what you want to do. I'm not judging you. But when you see thousands of women saying, I never wanted this, I can't escape. I couldn't escape. The guy that was controlling me would beat me, put cigarette butt burns on me, do all kinds of things to me, and there was no one to run to. You know how many times I spoke to women and I said, well, why didn't you run to the police? He said, and you know what they told me? Because we have to service the police in the back of a car. In the back of a car. So who do you run to? You know, it has, you know, this whole thing has to be looked at from a large perspective as to all of this is because of this patriarchal society and because we as men think that we're so cool and we can do whatever we want. You're not going to have equality. And I always argue with these men who think that they have this right. If this was your daughter, what would you do? If this was your niece or your granddaughter, what would you do? And they explode at me, goes, I can kill them. I would kill them. I would kill them. Yeah, but then that's someone else's daughter.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, that was great. Speaking of the downtrodden and the vulnerable, you've taken a very big interest in orphans through your writing, and I know you go to Ukraine and help out there and support them there. I remember when I was in Tajikistan many years ago, I met some orphans there, but actually they have parents, they have families. It's just that the families there, it's a very poor country, can't afford to the upkeep for their kids. So they send them off to a so-called orphanage where they frankly live in very horrendous conditions. I'm wondering, through your research, have you found that kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of economic or orphans as well? And also I wanted to know what led you to take such a big interest in this issue.
Look, the boys' home I was in for 4.5 years was, sometimes people were saying was like an orphanage. It was people who came, boys, and in other places, girls, who came from situations where the family couldn't take care of them because they were totally impoverished. They had an alcoholic father. They had a parent who was too violent, or there was a problem. One parent was in prison, for example. These kids did nothing wrong, but in their life, they began to believe that they were less than good because nobody wanted them. When you look at situations in other countries like Ukraine and Russia, for example, where they have massive institutions called internats, and you see that there are thousands, 100,000 in Ukraine, over 1 million in Russia, in these places, and you say to yourself, well, they're orphanages. Well, no, 90% of the kids in those so-called orphanages have a family member somewhere who can't afford to take them on, or there's a situation, there's a problem. So they rot in these institutions year after year, decade after decade. And when they graduate, they use the word graduate, they graduate to the streets, and eventually you see them in the prison system because, hey, they were programmed to fail. Ukraine, I have been fighting with the government and with various people here and elsewhere who have the ability to do something or to raise the issue and to do something about it. I'm doing something about it in a small way where we've rescued some girls and we've built a house for them, and their life is really something else to see how they're growing and how they're flourishing. But you still have 100,000 kids in these orphanages. And I keep arguing with people here and people overseas, you've got to do something to close down these monoliths of suffering. You cannot have 100,000 kids in these institutions and expect any good out of it. Most of the time, 90%, 95% of them go skidding down into a bad situation. There are ways that you can deal with it. When Quebec was overly institutionalized, or Ontario, or other various states in the States and other countries, they closed the institution. They got group homes, they got foster care, they got situations that had a closer look to family, or they gave the money to the families that were impoverished to help them take care of their kids. Instead of paying, $10,000, $20,000, $60,000, $80,000 a year, depending on what country, to keep a kid in an institution and keep that institution running forever. They could have done something differently. They didn't. And it just drives me crazy when I talk to people who should have a brain and also have the ability here, for example, to talk to people over there and say, this is what we can do, this is what can be done. But they don't. They're, again, you have clowns who are, in charge of organizations where they walk around like, wow, look at me, I am president, I am vice president, I am, the chief bottle washer. And do something. This is a crisis, has been a crisis for decade after decade after decade. Think of the thousands of children who walked into these places or were carried into these places as babies. And when they finally graduated, 18 years old, they know nothing. They are violent. Yeah. They've been sexually abused. They've been trafficked, all kinds of beaten, bullied, whatever. And they go out on the street and they end up in the prison system. And why could you not have taken care of them and made them into really good members of society where they could do some good and feel that somebody cared about them? Nobody cares about you in an institution. Nobody. You're lucky if somebody does care about you.
Now, I know there's a lot of people in Ukraine that listen to this program. There's a lot of Ukrainian diplomats, Ukrainian government officials. You have the microphone. Tell them what they need to do immediately about this crisis.
Get off your butts. Shut these places of suffering down. There are all kinds of things that you can do. You had an ombudsman in that country who came up with a plan. You have people in different countries like Canada, the United States, who have closed down these big institutions where children suffered. Children are innocent. They are not there to suffer. You can nourish them. You could bring them up and make them into really successful people who feel that somebody cares about them. When they feel that they are useless and nobody cares about them, then you've got a problem when they become adults. And you know what? You partially or largely are responsible for it. You've got an opportunity. I've heard different presidents and prime ministers from Ukraine say they're going to act. Yeah, on a stage? Because they say the right words and do nothing. And organizations in Canada, the United States, and in Great Britain and elsewhere, Ukrainian organizations, they do a bit of lip service and then do nothing. They have to lead the charge as well. Children need to be protected, need to be cared for. What is wrong with doing that? I don't want to rub elbows with clowns. I want to see something done to help these kids. You know, we managed to do it in Quebec. We managed to do it across Canada. We managed to do it in the United States and other Western countries. Do something to save these children.
Okay, and just quickly to bring into this part of the segment, can you put a human face on this crisis out of the dozens or perhaps hundreds of orphans you met, perhaps in Ukraine? Is there someone you've met or got to know well who sticks in your mind and who has quite a story that kind of encapsulates what you've said?
Yeah, you know, the little girls that we've rescued and taken to a house in a village that was built by people in Saskatoon and across Canada, but largely in Saskatoon, called Nashi. There were some of these girls that, particularly one who never spoke, never said anything, and you knew that she had had a horrific situation, sexually abused, all kinds of things that happened to her. And she got rescued by our group. I think she must have been about 11 years old. She's now, I just saw her on a Christmas thing. She's singing away. She's happy as heck. And she's going to be going to university. We're going to pay for her. And she'll go to university in Lviv. And when you see these kids, when they first come in, and you see them 2 and 3 years later, where they are all sisters, they're all happy, they're all singing. And when the Canadians go over, it's like we're their grandparents, their step-parents in Canada, you know? And everybody who comes there, who is involved with Nashi, who, you know, they raise the money by making pierogies, you know, and having a big pierogi fest in Saskatoon. And they know that when these people go over and see these girls, they cry, they laugh, they say, wow, these girls have a chance at a really good life. But boy, when you see them, when they first came in, you don't know you don't know if they will ever be saved. But you know what? They were saved by the love and by the caring of these people from Nashi. And, you know, this is one little group in Saskatoon doing this. And I always say, can you imagine if a bunch of groups did this over and over and over? You know, my whole theory to them and to everybody else is, if you can touch the soul of one person that really needs help and you help them, you've done something in your life. Because people always say to me, oh, Victor, these problems are too huge. They're too big. What am I going to do? You know, I'll just throw some money at it. No, if every single person just touched the soul of one person and helped them, you have done an incredible job in your life. You know, I go out and try to do the big picture, but I ring alarm bells. I raise alarm bells and say, here's a crisis over here. Young women are being trafficked. Young women are being beaten and raped. Here's a crisis over here. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of children trapped in these institutions that you call orphanages. You know, we can do something about it. Why would you not want to help a child? Why?
And we'll certainly post links of Nashi and other organizations that people can learn about and donate to. Melissa, what do you reckon? Time for a couple of audience questions?
Sure. So we have a question from a woman. Her name is Christia Shudzak. I'm so sorry if I butchered the name.
Yeah.
It has a DCZ. Okay, Shudzak. Yeah, from Ottawa. And she's asking, do you think journalism is dead in the digital age?
What is dead?
Journalism.
Oh, yeah. I think right now we have to try to figure out where we're going as journalists. Too many newspapers are folding, or they're cutting back staff to the point of staff rewriting press releases and rewriting copy that's coming from other countries rather than going out and sending reporters out to get the real story, to dig. This is happening in television as well with the news outlets, and the news outlets are more concerned with advertising rather than sending out really good reporters and training reporters to become good journalists. to be able to go and investigate this, all of the situation behind the pandemic, or what's going on in government, where the corruption is, what's going on with the police forces, rather than just reporting what's going on everywhere else. Okay, we know what's going on. And this is one of the problems. We know what's going on, but nobody is digging to find out why it's going on, what's happening, what were the causes. The journalism schools, I think, overall are a major failure. They're not getting these journalists to really learn about what it is they should be doing. The who, what, where, why, and how is simplicity at its best. The bottom line is you have to get these reporters to really want to dig into the stories and give them the opportunity to do it. If you kill the burn by saying you have to be objective, it's a crock. Nobody's objective. You have to allow them to dig into situations that say to them, I'm doing something that's really important. Not just going to listen to another politician give another speech and go, like putting them to sleep. But journalism overall, the way it's going right now, to me, it's a real sad commentary, considering what I had done in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the year 2000. I mean, I was given the opportunity to really dig. So were a lot of other investigative reporters. I mean, all of this sort of started with, the two reporters from the New York Times that broke the Nixon story.
Woodworth and
Yeah.
Bernstein. Yeah.
Woodward and Bernstein were, I guess was the flame. They were the ones who said, we're going to dig. We're going to go after this kind of stuff. And all kinds of reporters wanted to be investigative reporters. And they did a great job. But you saw them now over the last decade all by the wayside, because you need the bodies to go out there and cover the mundane. And that's what they're covering. The newspapers and television station owners have got to allow reporters, have not only allowed reporters, but to train reporters to become, pretty good at their field, or experts in certain fields, whether it's in medical or science or in policing or whatever, environment, social issues, whatever. They have to get these reporters to be able to dig and find out what's really going on, so the public can be really informed, not just simply reporting on a press release, or not simply reporting on the spewings of politicians.
Okay. And we have a question from Rachel Mullins from Los Angeles. She is an advocate of women's empowerment. Could you please describe the human trafficking situation around the U.S. southern border and some of the misconceptions surrounding it?
Yeah, the situation in the United States is really bad. It's interesting when the State Department picks on all of these countries and doesn't pick on its own country. The United States has a horrific history of trafficking of women from within the United States, particularly minority women from the southern border, with Latinos being trafficked in from various countries there, and from the north here with people being trafficked down. There are police forces that really act pretty hard, and they go after the Johns. They go after the men, because the men are responsible for this. Don't go after the victim, which is the trafficked woman. But there has to be a concerted effort nationwide to do something about this, because hitting one little area here once every year or something, or doing a raid there, doesn't stop the problem. But you will send a very strong message by identifying the men, the Johns, and giving some of them good serious jail time. And it'll send a message that you can't go out and just do this willy-nilly because you've got money in your pocket. But the reality for the United States is it is one hell of a hot potato on this issue. It's very, very hot. And it hasn't done very much to do anything about it. But listen, whether it's the United States, same problem in Canada. Police forces have it on the low rung of their, we have too many other things happening. So,
Yeah.
Shall we do like a little game? a rapid fire question game and
Sure.
lighten up a little bit.
Put Mr. Malarek on the hot seat for once.
Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
we've been talking a lot about dark things, so let's just end on a, positive, fun, note.
Okay.
So, what's your favorite actress or actor? And or.
Favorite actor or actress? I don't know if I have a favorite. No, I actually don't have a favorite. No, believe it or
Have
not.
you met Josh Hartnett, the actor who played you? Have you actually both met?
Oh yeah, we met. So he could see me and I could see him, and he captured a lot of me. I'll tell you, and I really like him a lot. And
I was going to ask, did you help him to prepare for the role? I mean, did you both work together on the preparation?
One of the things I told him was, you do me with a burn. Because if you do me just walking around, no, you got to have a burn. And he did. He really did a good number on playing me. A lot of people looked at that and went, after a while, wow, that's him. That's Malarek.
No debate there. I kind of think I know the answer to the next one. Your favorite travel destination?
Greece, the islands of Greece, and that's my nirvana. That's my place to just let go of everything. I walk around the islands where I go, and I go to the very peaceful islands, the very quiet islands, and just to, get in touch with my spirit, my sense of self, and say to myself, okay, relax, because I'm a very tense guy until I get to Greece.
Okay.
All right. What's your favorite inspiring book?
Which book?
Inspiring book.
Oh, inspiring.
Inspiring, yeah, something that, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, geez, I got many of them, but I really enjoyed The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. I've read all of Dostoevsky's books, which completely depressed the hell out of me, but boy, powerful books. Believe it or not, I love Dickens, Charles Dickens. And
that's depressing too.
Yeah.
You're like dark, heavy, stuff.
But I also like mystery writers like Michael Connelly and Ian Rankin from Scotland, which, his Rebus books to me are really great because I love investigations where even to the end, I'm trying to figure out, okay, who did it? And I go, that person. No, shit was wrong. That person. Oh my God, it was this person. So, Rebus is great. And with Ian Rankin, Michael Connelly with, his characters.
Okay. Your favorite Ukrainian cuisine or favorite Ukrainian dish?
What my mother makes for me when I go to Montreal. But I had pierogies smothered in sour cream, butter melted with onions all over it. I'm a real uke for that.
And for those who don't know, you have to describe the pierogi for us. What is it?
Well, it's like
a ravioli. Yeah, it's like raviolis, right? Like it looks like
a ravioli.
ravioli.
You take the dough, but inside the dough is potatoes with melted cheese inside it, and then you close it up, you boil it, and you eat it. And then then you can put the drench it with buttered and sautéed onions and sour cream, and then the next
bacon bits to make it healthier.
Yeah. And then the next day, you can have them pierogies refritos, refried, which I love.
Yes.
Okay,
and now, by the way, they're sold all across Canada and most major supermarket chains in the frozen section. They've almost gone mainstream, which is really cool.
You should see when they do one pierogi at a time in Saskatoon. They make over 80,000 pierogies. All these people are pinching. And one of the guys there who's done a phenomenal job was down in Mexico, and he put together a black bean type pierogi, which
wow.
I heard about it. I went, I don't think so. But I got to tell you, it was really good. But still, classic, the classic.
That's good.
It's my mother's.
All right. Let's talk about, your favorite French word.
Well, my friend, it was a phrase actually. When I used to work I worked up in the Beauce in the Chaudière in Quebec, and they speak a real slang there. And I was a young guy, and would go dancing, and all the girls would say to me, Victor, vous êtes vraiment un chanteur de pommes.
What?
Chanteur
Un
de pommes.
chanteur de pommes?
Yeah, singer of apples, which translated is sweet talker.
Oh,
Is that a Quebec expression?
It's a joual expression from up in the Beauce.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I've never heard of it. I've just
And the rest of my favorite expressions actually have to do with the Catholic religion and swearing in French.
taking items from the altar, correct?
You don't do things halfway. You just go for it. I like
Mon
that.
dit colis tabarnak, j'ai pas de temps pour ça.
Love it.
Hey, we're rated 18 and under as well.
Uh-oh.
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
Okay. I think, yeah, that's it for rapid fire questions. We
Yeah.
needed that laugh.
Yeah, we
Okay.
did. Sure did.
Oh my, it's been so informative, and there was a lot to cover. I mean, we talked
Yeah.
about pretty much the whole career, like almost we spanned everything.
Well,
And,
47 years in journalism is a long time. And
it's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I just wish there were more people like you today. Seriously. we need more Victor Malarek in journalism.
Yes.
I mean, please,
we do.
people, watch this podcast or vodcast, listen to it, and if you get into journalism, listen to him, because
Yeah.
we need fire. We need fire. We need people brave who have the fire and are not afraid to fight. So please, listen to this podcast and just get inspired.
well,
Yeah,
thanks.
and
very
I think
important.
you've managed to open a lot of people's eyes yet once again, and I really appreciate it as well. Your very frank comments on the police, and if I start getting parking tickets all of a sudden, I'm going to be sending them to you.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Victor.
take care, Victor.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Well, that was great. Behalf of Melis and myself, thank you very much to Victor Malarek for taking all this time and for being so candid and frank and open with us. This brings us to the end of another episode of Global Impact, the podcast and vodcast. And the program is supported in part by the Taras Shevchenko Foundation. We're grateful for their support. Remember, as you listen or view this, please subscribe and press that star button as well. Give us 5 if you want. And there's also a link on the Anchor platform where you can support the program as well. And as we always like to say, there are still millions and millions of people in lockdown or by themselves or in great state of anxiety or worry, especially because of the pandemic. So remember to use this technology we have in our hands to go out and touch somebody, even if it's a text, a small ping, a phone call. Do reach out and touch someone. It could make a very, very big difference in their day. So thank you again for listening, for viewing, and we will see you again soon.